The handcuffs bit into my wrists as Sheriff Karen shoved the plastic baggie in my face. White powder caught the morning light streaming through my broken front door. My neighbors stood on their porches, watching in horror as deputies ransacked my home. "Looks like we found something interesting," Karen sneered, her badge gleaming against her tactical vest. But I knew something she did not, something that would change everything. My son Jake had been driving through the night, and his car had just pulled into my driveway. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and until 6 months ago, I thought I lived in one of those small towns where everyone looked out for each other. You know the kind of place. White picket fences, kids riding bikes until the streetlights came on. The sort of community where people still waved when they passed each other on Main Street. I had built my life around routine and responsibility. Every morning at 5:30, I would wake up to make coffee in my little kitchen. The same kitchen where I had raised my son Jake after his father walked out when Jake was only 7 years old. 2 jobs kept us afloat. I worked the morning shift at the diner downtown, serving coffee and pancakes to farmers and shop owners. Then I would rush home to change clothes before heading to my evening job at the local grocery store. It was not glamorous, but it was honest work. It paid the bills and kept food on our table. More importantly, it gave Jake something to be proud of. His mother never took the easy way out. His mother worked for everything we had. Jake had grown up strong and determined, just like I had hoped he would. After graduating high school, he moved to the city to train as a mixed martial arts fighter. It was his dream, and I supported him completely. Every month, he would send me photos from the gym, pictures of him sparring with other fighters, working with coaches, building the kind of discipline and focus that comes from pursuing something you love with everything you have. He was making a name for himself in the amateur circuit. Small fights at first, but the coaches said he had potential, real potential. I was so proud of the man he had become. My neighbors knew me as the quiet single mom who minded her own business. I paid my bills on time. I kept my yard neat and my house clean. I had never been arrested, never even gotten a speeding ticket. The most trouble I had ever caused was accidentally letting my garbage cans blow into Mrs. Henderson's yard during a windstorm. But even in our peaceful little town, there were whispers about Sheriff Karen Bradshaw. She had been elected 3 years earlier on a platform of law and order. At first, people appreciated her no-nonsense approach. Crime was down, she claimed. The streets were safer. Slowly, though, stories began to circulate. Traffic stops that lasted too long. Search warrants executed with unnecessary force. Young people harassed for gathering in public spaces. Business owners complained about surprise inspections that felt more like intimidation tactics. Most people kept their concerns to themselves. After all, who complains about the sheriff? Who questions the person with the badge and the gun and the authority to make your life very difficult? I should have paid more attention to those whispers. I should have realized that in a small town, no one is safe when the person with the most power decides that power is more important than justice. The sound that woke me was not human. It was the splintering of wood and the crash of metal against metal. My front door was being destroyed. Police search warrant. I bolted upright in my bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. The clock on my nightstand glowed 5:03 a.m. Through my bedroom window, I could see the flashing red and blue lights painting my neighbors' houses in alternating colors of emergency. Before I could even put on my robe, they were inside my house. Heavy boots thundered across my hardwood floors. Voices shouted commands and coordinates like they were storming a drug cartel's compound instead of a single woman's modest home. "Sarah Mitchell, get out here now." I stumbled out of my bedroom, pulling my robe tight around my chest. The hallway was full of deputies in tactical gear. They looked like soldiers, not police officers. Bulletproof vests, helmets, weapons drawn and ready. Sheriff Corinne Bradshaw stood in my living room like she owned the place. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to look through you instead of at you. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, her badge polished to mirror brightness. "What is going on?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What are you doing in my house?" "We have a search warrant," Corinne said, not bothering to look at me as she spoke. "Drug trafficking, possession with intent to distribute." The words hit me like a physical blow. There must be some mistake. I do not use drugs. I do not sell drugs. I work 2 jobs and mind my own business. Corinne finally looked at me then, and I saw something in her expression that made my blood run cold. It was not the look of a police officer doing her duty. It was the look of someone who enjoyed having power over other people. "We will see about that," she said. The deputies spread through my house like locusts. They overturned furniture, emptied drawers, tore books from shelves. My grandmother's china cabinet was searched so roughly that 2 of her precious teacups shattered on the floor. The sound made me want to cry. "Please," I said, "you are destroying everything. Can you not be more careful?" "Shut up," one of the deputies barked. "Sit down and do not move." They handcuffed me to my own kitchen chair. I sat there in my pajamas and robe, watching strangers violate every corner of my private life. They went through my bedroom, my bathroom, my closets. They even searched my refrigerator and kitchen cabinets, looking for drugs that did not exist. "Sheriff," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable, "I think there has been a misunderstanding. Maybe you have the wrong address. Maybe the warrant is for someone else." Corinne walked over to where I sat restrained in my own kitchen. She leaned down so her face was inches from mine. Her breath smelled like coffee and cigarettes. "Are you telling me how to do my job?" she asked softly. "No, ma'am. I am just trying to understand what this is about." "This is about cleaning up the drug problem in this town," Corinne said. "And right now, you are part of that problem." 20 minutes into the search, Deputy Martinez called out from my back bedroom, "Sheriff, I found something." My heart stopped. I knew they could not have found drugs because I did not have any drugs. But the way Martinez was holding up a small plastic baggie, the way Corinne's face lit up with satisfaction, told me that somehow, impossibly, they had found exactly what they were looking for. "Well, well," Corinne said, taking the baggie from Martinez and holding it up to the light. "What do we have here, Sarah?" I stared at the white powder in the baggie, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. "That is not mine," I whispered. "I have never seen that before in my life." "Of course you have not," Corinne said with a cold smile. "They never are." The walk from my front door to the police car was the longest walk of my life. Every step felt like a mile. Every neighbor who had come out to watch felt like a jury pronouncing me guilty. Mrs. Henderson stood on her porch in her flower-print housecoat, her hand covering her mouth in shock. Tom and Linda from across the street peered through their window blinds. The Martinez family from next door gathered on their lawn, their children staring wide-eyed at the handcuffed woman they had known their entire lives. "Nothing to see here, folks," Corinne announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Just taking out the trash." The deputies laughed, actually laughed, as if destroying my life was entertainment. I tried to hold my head up as they guided me toward the patrol car, but shame burned in my chest like acid. These people had known me for years. They knew I was not a criminal. They knew I worked hard and minded my own business. But what they knew did not matter now. What mattered was what they saw: Sarah Mitchell being arrested for drug possession in front of her own home. "Wait," I said as Deputy Martinez opened the car door. "Can I at least call my son? Can I tell him what is happening?" "You can make your phone call at the station," Karen said, "after you are processed." Processed was a cold word that made me feel like a piece of meat being prepared for packaging. I was not a person anymore. I was a case number, a statistic, a problem to be handled. At the police station, they took my fingerprints and my photograph. The flash of the camera left spots in my vision. The ink from the fingerprinting stayed under my nails for days afterward. They gave me an orange jumpsuit that smelled like industrial detergent and fear. The holding cell was small and cold. A metal bench, a metal toilet, and nothing else. I sat there for 6 hours before they let me make my phone call. Jake answered on the second ring. "Mom, what is wrong? You never call this early." "Jake," I said, my voice breaking, "I need you to listen to me carefully. I am in jail." The silence on the other end of the line lasted forever. Then, "What happened? Are you hurt? Are you okay?" I told him everything. The early morning raid, the planted evidence, Sheriff Karen's obvious satisfaction at destroying my life. Jake listened without interrupting, but I could hear his breathing getting heavier and angrier with each detail. "I am coming home," he said when I finished. "No," I said quickly. "You have training, you have fights scheduled. Do not let this mess up your career." "Mom," Jake said, and his voice had changed. It was deeper now, harder, the voice of a man who had made a decision. "Someone just attacked my family. I am coming home." The bail hearing was a joke. Karen had filled out a report claiming I was a flight risk and a danger to the community. The judge, who I later learned played poker with Karen every Thursday night, set bail at $50,000. I could not afford $50,000. I could barely afford to keep my lights on. So I sat in that cell for 3 more days, eating terrible food and listening to the other women talk about their children and their jobs and their lives that had been interrupted by Sheriff Karen's version of justice. When I finally got out, thanks to a bail bondsman who took pity on me, I came home to find my house still in shambles. The deputies had not bothered to clean up their mess. My furniture was overturned, my belongings scattered, my sense of safety completely destroyed. But the worst part was not the physical damage. The worst part was the way my neighbors looked at me now. The way conversations stopped when I walked by. The way people I had known for years suddenly found reasons to cross the street rather than say hello. Sheriff Karen had not just arrested me. She had assassinated my character, my reputation, my place in the community. And she had done it all with a smile. The first thing I did after being released was clean my house. Not because it needed to be clean, but because I needed to feel like I had control over something. Anything. I spent 3 days putting my life back together, piece by broken piece. Every overturned drawer, every scattered photograph, every broken dish was a reminder of how easily your entire world can be turned upside down by someone with a badge and an agenda. But as I cleaned, I also started to think, really think, about what had happened to me and why. The drugs they claimed to find had been planted. I was certain of that. But how had they gotten a search warrant in the first place? What had they told the judge to convince him that I, a law-abiding single mother with no criminal history, was dangerous enough to justify a military-style raid on my home? I spent hours at the public library, researching my rights and the laws surrounding search warrants and evidence. I learned about something called a no-knock warrant and how they were supposed to be reserved for the most dangerous situations. I learned about the Fourth Amendment and how it was supposed to protect people like me from exactly what had happened. Most importantly, I learned that what Sheriff Corinne had done to me was not legal, not even close. The more I researched, the angrier I became, and the more I realized that I was probably not the first person this had happened to. How many other people had Corinne railroaded? How many other innocent people were sitting in jail cells because she wanted to make her arrest numbers look good? I tried to file a complaint with the county administration. The clerk, a nervous young woman who could not make eye contact with me, told me that all complaints against the sheriff's department had to be reviewed by the sheriff herself. I tried to contact the state police. They told me it was a local matter and referred me back to the county. I tried to hire a lawyer. The first 3 attorneys I called said they did not take cases against law enforcement. The 4th one was more honest. "Look, Mrs. Mitchell," he said over the phone, "Sheriff Bradshaw has a lot of friends in this county. Judges, prosecutors, other cops. Even if you are right, even if she planted that evidence, proving it is going to be almost impossible. And frankly, going up against her is bad for business." That night I called Jake. I had been putting it off because I knew what he would say, and I was not sure I was ready to hear it. "How are you holding up, Mom?" he asked. "I am managing," I said. "But Jake, I need to tell you something. I think I am going to fight this. Really fight it. Not just the charges, but what she did. What she is probably doing to other people." Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Good. You should fight it, but you should not fight it alone." "What do you mean?" "I mean I am driving home tomorrow. My trainer says I can take a few weeks off without losing too much conditioning. And honestly, Mom, I have been thinking about this nonstop since you called. Someone violated our family. Someone hurt you. And I cannot just sit here 300 miles away and pretend that is okay. Jake, you do not understand. This sheriff, she has real power here. She can make life very difficult for people who cross her." "Mom," Jake said, and I could hear the smile in his voice, "I am a professional fighter. Making life difficult for people is literally what I train for 8 hours a day." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and looked around at my house. It was clean now, but it would never feel the same. Sheriff Corinne had made sure of that. She had violated my space, my peace of mind, my sense of security. But she had also made a mistake. She had assumed I would be like all the other people she had bullied over the years. She had assumed I would keep my head down, accept what had happened, and be grateful that it was not worse. She had not counted on the fact that I had raised a son who believed in fighting for what was right. And she definitely had not counted on that son coming home with 3 years of professional combat training and a very personal reason to use it. I made myself a cup of coffee and started making a list. Names of people who had complained about Corinne's tactics, dates and times I could remember, details about the raid that did not add up. If Corinne wanted a fight, she was going to get one, but it was going to be fought on my terms, not hers. Jake pulled into my driveway at 2:47 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I know the exact time because I had been watching for his car since dawn, even though he had told me he would not arrive until evening. When he got out of his Honda Civic, I almost did not recognize him. The boy who had left for the city 3 years ago had been replaced by a man who looked like he could walk through walls. His shoulders were broader, his arms thicker, his entire presence more solid and confident. But when he hugged me on the front porch, he was still my Jake, still the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "Are you okay?" he asked, holding me at arm's length and looking me over like I might be physically injured. "I am now," I said, and I meant it. We spent the first hour just talking. Jake wanted to hear every detail of what had happened, and I could see his jaw getting tighter with each part of the story. When I told him about the planted evidence, his hands clenched into fists. When I described the way Corinne had smiled while destroying my house, he stood up and walked to the window, his back rigid with controlled anger. "She made a big mistake," he said finally. "What do you mean?" Jake turned around, and the look in his eyes was something I had never seen before. Not anger, exactly. More like focus. The kind of focus that comes from knowing exactly what you need to do and exactly how you are going to do it. "She picked on someone who has a son willing to fight back," he said, "and she has no idea what she is dealing with." We spent the next 3 days developing our strategy. Jake had learned more than just fighting during his time in the city. He had learned about discipline, about planning, about the importance of gathering intelligence before you engage your opponent. "This is not about revenge," he told me as we sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by legal documents and printed articles about Sheriff Corinne's history. "This is about justice, and justice requires evidence, witnesses, and a plan." We started by documenting everything. Jake helped me write down every detail I could remember about the raid. We took photographs of the damage to my house that had not been repaired. We made copies of all the legal documents related to my case. Then we started reaching out to other people who had been affected by Corinne's tactics. It was slow work because people were scared to talk, but gradually a pattern emerged. Maria Santos, whose teenage son had been arrested for resisting arrest after asking why he was being pulled over. The charges were dropped, but not before he spent 2 nights in jail and missed his college scholarship interview. Bob Richardson, a local business owner who had been subjected to repeated health and safety inspections after he refused to make a campaign contribution to Corinne's re-election fund. The Williams family, whose house had been raided based on an anonymous tip that turned out to be completely false. No charges were filed, but their door was never repaired, and their reputation in the community was permanently damaged. Each story was different, but they all had the same theme: Sheriff Corinne using her power to intimidate, harass, and punish anyone who did not show her the respect she thought she deserved. "She has been doing this for years," Jake said after we had compiled a list of 12 families who had been targeted. "And she has been getting away with it because people are afraid to fight back." "So what do we do?" I asked. Jake smiled, and for a moment he looked like the mischievous little boy I remembered. "We give her a reason to be afraid of us." The plan we developed was elegant in its simplicity. We would continue to gather evidence and build a legal case, but we would also be prepared for the inevitable moment when Corinne tried to escalate the situation. Because bullies like her always escalate when they feel threatened. Jake started working out in our garage, turning it into a makeshift gym. Every morning, I would wake up to the sound of him hitting the heavy bag he had hung from the ceiling beams. The rhythmic thudding became the soundtrack of our preparation. "You know she is going to come after us," I said one morning as I watched him train. "I am counting on it," Jake replied, not breaking his rhythm, "because when she does, I am going to be ready." 2 weeks after Jake came home, we got our first test. Sheriff Corinne herself showed up at my door, supposedly to check on my compliance with bail conditions. But I knew it was really about intimidation, about reminding me who had the power. She had not expected to find my son standing behind me when I opened the door. Sheriff Corinne had been counting on fear. She had built her entire career on the assumption that people would be too scared to stand up to her authority. But when she saw Jake standing in my doorway, something shifted in her expression. Just for a moment, I saw uncertainty replace the usual arrogance. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, trying to sound official and professional, "I need to conduct a compliance check on your bail conditions." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means I need to make sure you are not using or selling drugs while you await trial." Jake stepped forward, not threateningly, but definitely protectively. "Do you have a warrant for this compliance check?" he asked. Karen looked at him for the first time, really looked at him. She took in his size, his obvious physical conditioning, the way he carried himself with quiet confidence. I could see her mental calculations changing. "I do not need a warrant for a compliance check," she said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. "Actually, you do," Jake said calmly. "Unless my mother is on probation or parole, which she is not, you need probable cause or a warrant to search this house again." "And you are?" Corinne asked. "I am her son, Jake Mitchell." Corinne nodded slowly. "The fighter, I heard you were back in town." "That is right, I am back." There was something electric in the air between them. Not hostility, exactly, but a mutual recognition of strength. Corinne was used to dealing with people who were afraid of her. Jake was not afraid of her, and she could sense it. "Well," Corinne said, "I guess I will be seeing you around town." "I am sure you will," Jake replied. After she left, Jake closed the door and turned to me. "She is going to try to provoke a confrontation," he said, "probably in public where there will be witnesses. She wants to make me look like the aggressor." He was right. Over the next week, Corinne seemed to be everywhere Jake and I went. When we went grocery shopping, she would happen to be in the same store, following us through the aisles. When Jake went for his morning run, she would drive slowly behind him in her patrol car. When we went to the diner for lunch, she would sit at the table next to ours, listening to our conversation. The harassment was subtle but constant, and it was clearly designed to make us feel hunted, watched, unsafe in our own town. The confrontation she was looking for finally came on a Saturday afternoon in the parking lot of the hardware store. Jake and I had just bought supplies to repair the damage from the raid, and we were loading them into his car when Corinne's patrol car pulled up behind us, blocking our exit. She got out slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone in the parking lot could see what was happening. There were at least 20 people around us, shopping and running errands. Perfect witnesses for whatever she had planned. "Jake Mitchell," she called out loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I need to talk to you." Jake straightened up from loading the car and turned to face her. "About what?" "About your attitude," Corinne said, walking closer. "About the way you have been disrespecting law enforcement in this town." "I have not disrespected anyone," Jake said calmly. "I have simply exercised my legal rights." "Your legal rights," Corinne laughed, but it was not a pleasant sound. "Boy, your legal rights are what I say they are." That was when Jake did something I had never seen him do before. He smiled. Not a friendly smile, but the kind of smile a predator gives when it realizes its prey has just made a fatal mistake. "No," he said quietly, "they are not." Corinne stepped closer, her hand resting on her service weapon. "Are you threatening me?" "I am correcting you," Jake said, his voice still calm but somehow more dangerous than if he had been shouting. "My rights are defined by the Constitution, not by your opinion." By now, a crowd had gathered. People were taking out their phones, recording what was happening. Corinne could see that her intimidation tactic was backfiring. Instead of making Jake look like a troublemaker, she was making herself look like a bully. "You need to watch yourself," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "Both of you. This town is not big enough for people who do not respect authority." Jake took a step forward. Not an aggressive step, but a confident one. Suddenly, Karen looked smaller, less imposing. The physical difference between them was obvious, but more than that, everyone watching could see who was in control of the situation. "Sheriff," Jake said, and his voice carried clearly across the parking lot. "I respect authority, real authority, authority that comes from serving and protecting people, not from bullying and intimidating them." Corinne's face flushed red. She looked around at the crowd, at the phones recording her, at the growing audience for her humiliation. Without another word, she turned and walked back to her patrol car. As she drove away, several people in the parking lot started clapping. Mrs. Henderson, who had been watching from her car, rolled down her window and called out, "Good for you, Jake." Someone needed to stand up to her. But Jake was not celebrating. He was already thinking about what would come next. "She is going to escalate now," he told me as we drove home. "That was her last attempt at intimidation. From here on out, it gets dangerous." The video of Jake's confrontation with Sheriff Karen went viral within hours. Someone had posted it on social media with the caption, "Local MMA fighter stands up to corrupt sheriff." And by the next morning, it had been viewed over 100,000 times. The attention was exactly what we needed, but it also made Karen desperate. Desperate people in positions of power do dangerous things. The first sign of her escalation came 3 days later. Jake was arrested for disturbing the peace while grocery shopping. The charge was ridiculous and would never hold up in court, but it served Karen's purpose. It got Jake into the system where she could control what happened to him. At least that was what she thought. What Karen did not know was that the viral video had caught the attention of someone who could actually help us. David Chen was a civil rights attorney from the state capitol who specialized in police misconduct cases. He had been following Sheriff Karen's career for years, waiting for the right case to take her down. "I have been watching her since her first year in office," he told me over the phone. "She has been careful and she has powerful friends. But this video, combined with your case, gives me what I need to file a federal civil rights lawsuit." Chen worked fast. Within a week, he had filed not just one lawsuit, but 3. A federal civil rights violation against Karen and the department, a state lawsuit for false imprisonment and intentional infliction of emotional distress, and a motion to dismiss all charges against me based on illegally obtained evidence. But more importantly, he started talking to reporters. The story of small-town corruption led by a sheriff who planted evidence and harassed innocent families was exactly the kind of story that television news loved. Reporters started calling other people in town, asking about their experiences with Sheriff Karen. That was when the floodgates opened. Maria Santos agreed to be interviewed about her son's arrest. Bob Richardson talked about the harassment he had endured for refusing to make campaign contributions. The Williams family shared their story about the false raid on their home. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source. Deputy Martinez, the officer who had found the drugs in my house. Martinez had a conscience, and 3 years of watching Karen abuse her power had been eating away at him. When the federal investigators interviewed him, he broke down and told the truth about what had really happened during the raid on my house. "She planted those drugs," he said in a recorded statement. "She told me to put the baggie in the bedroom and then pretend to find it. She said Mrs. Mitchell needed to be taught a lesson about respecting authority." The confession was devastating, not just because it proved what had happened to me, but because Martinez also revealed that it was not the first time Karen had planted evidence. There had been at least 6 other cases over the past 2 years where she had manufactured evidence to support arrests. The FBI opened an investigation. The state attorney general announced a review of every case Karen had been involved in for the past 5 years. The county commissioners called for her immediate resignation. Karen refused to resign, but her power was effectively broken. The other deputies stopped following her orders. The prosecutors stopped taking her cases seriously. The judges started scrutinizing her testimony more carefully. The media attention also revealed just how deep the corruption went. Karen had not been operating alone. She had been protected by a network of officials who either participated in her misconduct or looked the other way because it was politically convenient. The district attorney who had authorized the warrant for my arrest was forced to recuse himself from all cases involving Karen's department. The judge who had set my bail at $50,000 was censured by the State Judicial Commission. 3 other deputies were suspended pending investigation. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came during a town hall meeting that was organized to address the scandal. The meeting was packed with people who had been afraid to speak out before, but who now felt safe enough to tell their stories. Karen showed up to the meeting, probably hoping to control the narrative one last time. But when she stood up to speak, something unprecedented happened. Jake stood up too. "Sheriff Bradshaw," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the crowded room. "Before you say anything else, I think you owe my mother an apology." The room went silent. Karen looked around at the crowd, at the cameras, at the reporters taking notes. For the first time since I had known her, she looked vulnerable. "I was doing my job," she said weakly. "No," Jake said. "You were abusing your power and you got caught." Karen sat down without saying another word. She left the meeting early, but the damage was done. The entire town had seen her humiliated by the same young man who had stood up to her in the hardware store parking lot. 2 weeks later, the county commissioners voted unanimously to remove Sheriff Karen Bradshaw from office. She was arrested the following day on federal charges of civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and abuse of authority. The woman who had tried to destroy my life was finally facing justice. But more than that, the system that had protected her was being dismantled piece by piece. It was not just victory, it was vindication. 6 months after Sheriff Karen Bradshaw was removed from office, our town felt like a different place. Not just because she was gone, but because people had learned something important about themselves. They had learned that they did not have to accept abuse from people in positions of authority. The new sheriff was a man named Robert Hayes, a 20-year veteran of the state police who had volunteered to clean up the mess Karen had left behind. His first act was to implement new policies requiring body cameras for all officers and civilian oversight of all arrests. His second act was to personally apologize to every family that had been victimized by the previous administration. Karen herself was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The judge called her crimes a betrayal of the public trust that strikes at the very heart of our justice system. She looked smaller in her orange jumpsuit than she had in her uniform, but I felt no satisfaction in seeing her brought low. I felt only relief that she could not hurt anyone else. The civil lawsuit David Chen filed on my behalf was settled for more money than I had ever imagined having. Enough to pay off my house, quit one of my jobs, and set aside money for Jake's continued training. But more importantly, the settlement required the county to implement reforms that would prevent another Sheriff Karen from taking power. Jake decided to stay in town permanently. He found a good gym an hour away where he could continue his professional training, but he wanted to be close to family, close to home. The man who had left to pursue his dreams in the big city had discovered that some things are more important than personal ambition. I learned something about myself during all this, he told me one evening as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint our quiet street in shades of gold and orange. I learned that I am not just a fighter, I am a protector, and there are people in this world who need protection from bullies like Karen. He was thinking about becoming a police officer himself. The idea of my son wearing a badge and carrying a gun should have terrified me, but it did not. Jake had learned the difference between authority and authoritarianism, between power and abuse of power. He would be the kind of officer that people could trust and respect. As for me, I had learned something important too. I had learned that ordinary people are not as powerless as they think they are. It takes courage to stand up to corruption, and it takes persistence to see justice through to the end. But it can be done. The other families who had been victimized by Karen found their own forms of justice. Maria Santos's son got into college on a delayed scholarship. Bob Richardson's business was thriving again. The Williams family had their reputation restored and their legal fees paid by the county settlement. But perhaps the most important change was less tangible. People in town started talking to each other again. Not the whispered complaints and fearful gossip that had characterized Karen's reign, but open, honest conversations about the kind of community they wanted to live in. Main Street felt like Main Street again. People waved when they passed each other. Children rode their bikes until the streetlights came on. The town had reclaimed its sense of safety and community.